And a big welcome to our live audience for the Digital Health Investor Talk Show. I'm your host, Steve Wardell. I'm the managing partner of Wardell Advisors, a digital health advisory firm, and the author of The Future of Digital Health. Wardell Advisors is helping digital health companies boost growth, raise funding, find trade sale buyers, and create new strategic alternatives, giving you more options in today's challenging environment. You can follow me at x.com/Stephen Wardell. Our show today is on the topic of what next-gen MedTech brings to longevity with Lana Caron. Lana Caron is a MedTech and digital health veteran on a mission to help people live longer, healthier lives. As a general partner at Solas BioVentures, she invests in MedTech and biopharma innovations poised to transform how long and how well we live. Previously, she led digital health and AI investments at Philips Ventures and held leadership roles at MedTech companies innovating to improve our lives. This show is being recorded and will be included in my podcast series called The Digital Health Investor Talk Show. Subscribe to our podcast on Apple and Spotify and leave us a review. We have new podcast links for the shows, so be sure you see a recent episode when you subscribe, or you could be on the old links. This is not investment advice, and we are not investment advisors. Here's the format of our show. It's 90 minutes long, and Lana and I will spend the first part discussing the news and the macro picture and some other topics, and then we'll focus on our special topic of the day, and we encourage you to ask questions in the LinkedIn chat for the show. So great to have you here today, Lana. Please introduce yourself to our audience.
Thanks so much for having me, Steve. Happy New Year, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. I'm Lana Caron. I'm a partner at Solas BioVentures, where we invest in MedTech and biopharma companies working to transform health and healthcare. Prior to that, I spent over 20 years in MedTech at both large strategics and startups, leading business development, strategy, and innovation. And very excited to talk about longevity. Longevity first caught my attention a couple of years ago when more and more founders started making it a central part of their investment pitch. And I would say since then, that trend hasn't slowed. I'm excited about where the longevity space is headed, because I believe that we are getting closer to not just treating disease, but extending the years that we'll live free from it. And I think MedTech is going to play a massive role in that.
Thank you. Really interesting. And it sounds like you're one of those people who's a candidate for most interesting job in the world, I think.
I'm definitely grateful and fortunate.
So our first category of news will be macro news. So here we talk about things like index level, inflation, interest rates, jobs, unemployment, especially from the context of the innovation economy. And so here I'll just call attention to, the NASDAQ is at 23.6 thousand right now. It's seen a steady climb up. I think people were not necessarily expecting that. They thought perhaps the NASDAQ was a little overpriced, could pull in a bit, and it's near record highs. That, in theory, that's a very good sign, but there's also a bit of a bifurcation of the economy, which is to say that the market seems to be a little disconnected from the overall economy, and also that AI stocks are lifting the NASDAQ, whereas other stocks, which is the vast majority in terms of number of companies, have not been doing so great over the last month, the last year, the last 2 years. And so there's also a lot of concern in the air around white-collar job losses, and that could be because there was some middle management fat accumulated over the last 5+ years, but also because AI on the margin seems to be suppressing some job growth, possibly, while letting companies grow, but not necessarily hire. And that may be real today, or that may be just feared about the future. And there's also optimism about, so that the innovation economy could use lower interest rates. And there's some optimism about getting some lower interest rates, but also concern that that we could currently have an AI financial bubble in the public stock market, and that could potentially pop. And so specifically what I think is meant by an AI bubble in the financial market is that the Magnificent 10, whatever you want to call the top companies, they have highly valued PE ratios based on promises about the future. They're making CapEx has gone up, margins have gone down, new products are being developed. Those new products probably are not at their terminal price. They're being offered cheaply to get adoption of these products. And there's a promise from these companies to shareholders, this will be very profitable someday. The new AI products that are so expensive, that are being subsidized today, will be very profitable someday. But we just don't know. It's so early still. We just don't know if they really will deliver. robustly profitable products that will make up for this in the future. That's where the bubble is, that the stock prices are pricing that in as successful today, but it won't be successful with every company, and it may not be so successful across the board. And that's where stock prices could pull in. That's a sort of a summary of macro news. Are there any indices that do you have any, Lana? Do you have any reaction to that? Any indices that you follow, things you've been hearing? And for our audience, feel free to ask questions about macro in the chat.
Yeah, no, first of all, super interesting. Just very quickly on the AI bubble, do see valuations for AI companies definitely being at least well priced at a premium in the early stage markets for sure. I wouldn't want to throw numbers somewhere in the range of 25 to 50% is where I see valuation premiums for companies with AI component, at least in the MedTech and digital health worlds. I believe JP Morgan published a report that has a few very interesting data points around valuation. I know PitchBook is also publishing a few other reports, so worth taking a look there. But yeah, the valuations on AI companies are crazy right now. They're definitely pricing in that uncertainty or what we don't know right now, what use cases are really going to be monetizable or going to produce revenue as we expected. I also wanted to mention that lower interest rates would definitely be very helpful for early stage fundraising. I think the rates started to come down in 2025. So hopefully we're going to continue that, seeing that trend. Even just a slight reduction in interest rates last year, I think it definitely stimulated and increased a risk tolerance among VCs. And we're going to talk more about that later on, but we saw quite an uptick in venture capital flowing into the markets, which we desperately needed in the MedTech and digital health world.
Great, thank you. And so any other reflections on the macro environment for 2025 or thoughts about the future?
Gosh, so on a macro level, if we look at MedTech did really, really well despite the trade headwinds and geopolitical uncertainty. It delivered 7% revenue growth, which was expected. I think that along with lower interest rates, I think that's as we head into 2026 positions the whole industry for a good 2026.
Thank you. And so now another section is our JP Morgan preview. So next week is the most important conference in healthcare investing, and that's in San Francisco. It's an unusual conference because most people who go don't have tickets, and they just do meetings all week long during the day, and they go to parties at night. And by the way, I'm keeping the party list. So those of you can ask questions in the LinkedIn chat or email me, and I'll add you to the party list for JP Morgan. But people tend to get a snapshot of sort of what's coming, what's hot, what's not, what trends are continuing, what trends are stopping. And so I thought we'd do a sort of a prospective view and any predictions about what's going to happen next week in JP Morgan. And the conference is heavily about public biotech, but I like to look at a subsector of the conference, which is venture stage digital health. And that usually means non-FDA risk, venture stage digital health, the lens that I'm using. Lana, your lens definitely includes FDA risk in that as well. And so I think what I'll say is hot, but I think will be hot in the venture fundraising markets at this year's JP Morgan. So first of all, I think it'll be more optimistic than last year. Last year, there was definitely a sense of the markets being subdued and a lot of uncertainty that had people concerned, even though Gen AI was hot last year. And this gives me a chance to tell one of my JP Morgan jokes. And so the joke last year was that there was only one investor deck at all of JP Morgan last year. And that was one deck with one slide with one bullet point that just said generative AI for companies. That was for companies that were 2 years old or younger. But for companies that were 2 years old or older, there was a different deck. And that deck had one slide with 6 bullet points on it. And the first 5 bullet points were last year's deck. And the 6th bullet point is generative AI. So we'll see we'll see if things have matured or evolved since then. But my prediction for what's hot is that last year, Gen AI for healthcare administrative, and that includes revenue cycle management, was very hot. And I think it will continue to be hot. I think there'll be a little bit of hangover because we saw a little bubble happen just last year in this area. It was so hot, selling primarily to providers, secondarily to payers, but it'll remain strong. And I think we will not yet see the same strength in healthcare clinical for Gen AI because of problems and structural problems with healthcare. I think you might see it in the earliest stage startups, but not in venture and growth yet. That strong interest in the clinical side of Gen AI in healthcare. And then also pharma tech was very hot last year, and I think it will continue. So pharma tech is software and tech companies that sell into the enterprise budgets of pharma and MedTech. This is like Viva for revenue cycle management, eData for clinical trial automation, or Simulation Plus for modeling molecules in the drug discovery. And that strong budget spending money on that area as well. And then also consumer longevity tech. I think we'll see continued strength. And this is an area where we have companies like Superpower and Function Health. This is consumer, not MedTech. And I think we'll see continued interest there. But I think that it's going to run into some trouble, which is just the cost of acquiring customers and the churn of customers. I think that we're going to see, we're going to get some results which from companies that raised 50 million or 100 million in the last couple of years. And I will see if they've figured out an amazing way to keep and retain those customers and get them paying a couple $100 a year for those consumer longevity services, and whether they can do it or not. But I think that will remain strong, but be a little more, not a crash, but a little more realistic there. So before I move on to what's not hot or what's changed, Lana, any thoughts from you, predictions about the future, what's hot at JP Morgan?
I do agree with you that there will be continued focus on operational AI or voice AI. I don't know if you saw that voice AI and conversational AI deployments reached 90 to 100% adoption last year, and a lot of people were very surprised. And I think it was to be expected because all of these companies had been working on those deployments for almost a decade. So but I think we're going to continue seeing a lot of focus on operational AI. I think, there is still continuing to be a lot of issues, operational issues that need to be optimized across healthcare. I also think that there will be a lot of interest in robotics, AI based clinical tools. You did mention that you don't think that we're going to get there, but I think there's a lot of appetite for commercially staged kind of technologies that are ready to scale and optimize across different clinical domains. I'm seeing a lot of innovation, AI based kind of innovation in cardiology. So I think that's going to be a hot area. We're going to see a lot of AI-based softwares and medical device kind of solutions there, optimizing care pathways. Robotics, there's been a ton of news on the robotics side, so I think we're going to continue seeing a lot of innovation there. I think focus is going to continue to skew towards commercially ready technologies with digital, scalable digital infrastructure ready to scale. You saw a few M&As last year where companies, larger MedTech companies, bought digital data AI platforms. I think we're going to continue seeing that interest at GPM as well. Yeah, let me pause there.
Great, thank you. So James says about my joke about the slide decks, he says that joke doesn't get old because it still applies to the current AI buzz. So thank you, James. And Thomas asks for the party list. So yes, Thomas, I'll get you that. And so then what's not hot? What's going out of favor? And again, most of this is the same as last year. So one is, I think, sadly, prescription digital therapeutics, which had their sort of glory days maybe 4 or 5 years ago, continue to remain very out of favor. This is too bad. This is the idea that you have an FDA-cleared device or FDA-cleared software primarily that can actually have the strength of effectiveness of a pharmaceutical. Sounds incredible. It's possible, and then gets reimbursed like a pharmaceutical. And these had a stratospheric rise, and then you saw some crashes, most famous of which was Pear Therapeutics. And the investors in those, I think, got hurt, and the prior investors aren't willing to do more unless it's a slam dunk. And then the new investors have been hesitant to get into that area. But I think eventually prescription digital therapeutics, they're going to be strong in certain areas and weak in other areas. They're very different than gene editing or small molecule or large molecule, but they're their own modality. And eventually they're going to be, they work, and they're going to be in the suitcase, the sales bag of the sales rep, from a pharma company calling on physicians, and they'll be used. Sadly, it's not a hot year for fundraising for PETs, and it'll take some while to get there. And then also last year, I heard from MedTech CEOs who are venture stage that it was really tough fundraising environment for MedTech. I think that's going to continue as well. And then also a change. So a hot category last year was software and programs around GLP-1 drugs. So this is typically programs to keep people adherent, programs to keep people exercising, programs for people who don't tolerate GLP-1 drugs, programs to assure that there's not waste of GLP-1 drugs. And so there's a lot of those programs that affect the dieting industry, the diet and exercise industry, and that was very hot last year. And I think it's actually going to be not hot this year. That's a somewhat contrarian prediction of mine. And the reason is that the cost of these were all driven by the fact that GLP-1 drugs were very expensive, and that employers and payers were selectively reimbursing them, but they felt they couldn't merely reimburse the drugs. They had to include programs to make sure that only eligible people got on the drugs, that they took the drugs, that they also avoided the side effects of the drugs, that there wasn't wastage, etc. And now the cost of GLP-1s is claimed it's going to crater. It's going to fall by 80% or more, partly because of Trump doing deals with pharma CEOs in the White House and getting them to agree to cut their prices in the US, also due to competition as well, because it's a super category now. And so I think that a lot of those software companies, that the reason driving spending extra money on software programs around GLP-1s is going away. This is because it's going to become a more affordable drug. So love to hear your thoughts on what's not hot. And Lana, maybe what are you hearing from and seeing in venture around MedTech, and is that going to stay the same, or is that going to turn up, do you think?
On the venture in MedTech, 2025 was, we saw it turn. So we saw a significant influx of capital finally starting to flow into MedTech sector, and I am very hopeful that it's going to continue. Again, some of that capital is, most of that capital is flowing now to later stage companies that have commercially ready technologies ready to go to market or are scaling. So I think that's going to continue. I think it's going to be difficult, challenging environments for early stage medtech companies. So if you are at seed or Series A, even, you're gonna have to be very creative. You're gonna have to be selective and targeting in terms of who you should talk to. From the investor pool. I also think that you need to adjust your expectation in terms of how long it's going to take to fundraise, and maybe even be creative with your funding sources. So hopefully that's helpful. And in terms of what's not hot, this is something that is a wild card for me. Steve, I'll rely on your guidance here. Let me leave it at that. I know for sure that, companies with AI and digital components are going to be in high demand.
Thank you. And so Katerina, who, Lana, I think you and I both know well, she says hi to us, and she asks for the JP Morgan party list. So you got it, Katerina. I'll send that to you. And then John asks, given the AI bubble and focus on operational innovation, any thoughts on the VC trend away from FDA-regulated medtech or higher bars to secure Series A beyond FDA approval? This is a great question for you, Lana. I'll just jump in and mention that I actually had a guest on the show recently who talked about medtech companies pivoting to consumer, so they make fewer claims and they go direct to consumer to find a market and to sort of explore that, get enough revenue, and then save as an option for later, um, uh, you know, investing more and making greater claims and taking that to the FDA for approval and going down the professional pathway for marketing. So, but Lana, any thoughts on the VC trend away from FDA regulated medtech?
Well, I short answer is no. I think FDA regulated medtech is going to stick around. It's here to stay. I think that and there are so many different use cases, right? You've got clinical use cases, operational use cases. Many FDA regulatory tech is going after those clinical use cases where you have to pursue regulated pathway. And, there are many investors that are willing to take on that regulatory risk. For example, Solas is very comfortable with taking on that clinical and regulatory risk. So there is an appetite for those kind of investments and those kind of opportunities. But that's not to say that, there's not enough now opportunity for, let's say, operational AI kind of innovations, because now we are seeing, let's say, voice AI and conversational AI at 100% adoption. It's only at 100% and 90% adoption, let's say, across certain segment, right, of hospitals. So I still think that there is a lot of there's a lot of opportunity. But to make the long story short, I think there is room for FDA regulated tech investing, and there's also room for non-regulated tech opportunities. I also think that, I don't know if you saw news just probably yesterday that FDA is going to relax some requirements around what it expects from general wellness tech. And this is connected to the letter that Whoop received last year, right, about the blood pressure measurements that they were displaying. So FDA now saying that you don't have to pursue a traditional FDA path for securing FDA clearance for those kind of measurements, which is, I think, in line with what they've been saying, and how they go into support AI and other digital kind of opportunities. So I'm really happy to see that coming out from FDA, and I think that's going to create additional opportunity for wearables like Aura and Whoop and Withings and many other companies that have been actually supporting longevity, that we're going to talk about more later.
Great. And so we had another question about the consumer first path from David. And so I just want to mention with the consumer led path, and here we're talking often about devices, perhaps devices with medtech potential. There is a greater consumer purchasing market and there is a greater consumer investing market for products like these. And that's evidenced by, and these don't make medtech claims and they're sold direct to consumer. And that's evidenced by companies like Aura doing well and also by longevity companies like Function Health and Superpower and others. But the trouble is, if you go down that pathway, it creates complexity if you try to then also go down the medtech pathway. So you'd think, hey, I've got 10 million in revenue as selling to consumers. That's hard to achieve. If you achieve that, then medtech investors are going to love me and they're going to value me like a $10 million medtech company. And the answer is no, you've actually just created a lot of complexity. Having a board that's consumer oriented, prior capital is consumer oriented, your staff is your employees are consumer oriented, your commercialization pathway is consumer oriented. And those medtech investors, are looking for usually they're looking for a pure play that's going full speed down the medtech pathway to invest in. They're not looking for a company that spent years and built 10 million in revenue on the consumer pathway first.
Yeah, no,
So
that's right.
that's something to be aware of. And we've got a hopping comments section, and we've spent a lot of time on comments. I'm actually going to jump back into our agenda.
Yeah, Steve, I was just going to comment on something that you just said. Spot on. MedTech Investors typically don't understand general tech and they are scared of unit economics, and they do think that the skill set doesn't it's a different kind of skill set. The way you sell to a clinician and physician or into a health system is very different compared to how you sell to a consumer, which trade shows you go to. So I think some companies can do it really well, but it's a very expensive play.
And there's a joke about this, which is that MedTech investors can't spell brand and consumer investors can't spell FDA.
I haven't heard that, but I'm definitely going to be using that.
So even though we have great questions, I'm going to just move forward our office cooler chat agenda so we can then get to the second half of the show. So just any reflections on the IPO market, Lana? I'll just mention that from the digital health non-FDA risk perspective, the IPO market is a huge disappointment. So in the first quarter of last year, we had a couple of IPOs. In fact, the IPO market was opened by digital health companies. No one expected that. We had a few IPOs. Hinge was one. And then we thought that was there's over 100 digital health unicorns. Investors have been in them for over 9 years. Everyone thought that those investors definitely want to get out, and everyone thought there'd be more digital health IPOs, and then nothing for the rest of the year. It's not clear why, but the subtext is that they're not high quality enough. So investors at IPO investors like to see companies that have a combined gross margin and top line growth rate of about 50 points. So, it could be 30 points gross margin, 20 points top line growth rate. And the implication is that not a lot of those unicorns meet that, or else they would be able to IPO, and they didn't for 3/4 of a year. And then looking forward, and it's strange because the IPO market is at high levels, and the demand from the big mutual funds and hedge funds for IPO product is high, and we're seeing other sectors have their IPOs, but we're not seeing it in digital health, and we need it in digital health. So any thoughts on, and I don't see that changing or improving. I don't see what's the digital health company that's going to IPO and do spectacularly well and allow for all the other digital health companies to IPO. I'm not seeing that. Yeah, it could be an AI. It could be like Open Evidence maybe, but that they haven't indicated do anything. But that's hot enough to change things. Lana, any thoughts on the IPO market?
Yeah, from the MedTech standpoint, we had a very good year in 2025. It was a sluggish 2024 where only a handful of device makers found their way to public markets, but the tide began to turn in 2025. There was a meaningful jump compared to last year's in IPOs. And I don't know the exact number, how many MedTech companies actually went IPO, but it was over 10 for sure. So I'm just going to list, you might have heard about HeartFlow. So they went IPO with 300 plus million. It's an AI-based plaque analysis platform. BillionToOne went IPO as well. Kestra Medical, an AI-based wearable defibrillator, cardiac arrhythmia therapy company. Beta Bionics. So let's talk about that one. Artificial pancreas company. They raised 200 plus million. Also, Picard Medical went IPO with a smaller offering, but still, they had been working on a total artificial heart solution. And I think one of the larger ones that everybody was expecting was Medline at $6 billion. So it's the news came out late in December. Nobody was 100% sure whether they're going to make it because of the government shutdown. But at the end, I think they went and they raised $7 billion. I'm very hopeful that we're going to continue seeing this trend for MedTech because there are a lot of assets that need to exit.
Great, thank you. Let's see. So I'll just move on to section of business news and trade journal news. So here I like to talk about digital health fundraisers in the last couple of weeks. And I actually haven't seen a lot of digital health fundraisers in the last couple of weeks. And that's certainly because of the holiday season that investors are human too. And they like to go on trips and shut down during Christmas, New Year time. So, but I did see an interesting thing, which is that OpenAI has launched ChatGPT Health in partnership with Be Well. This is both new and it's also in line with trend, which is that every digital health, what are they called? Frontier model is promising great results from using their large language model. They're increasingly asking you to upload your records to them. So get an account with them, upload your records. Grok explicitly does this. Now ChatGPT is doing this. It could be a paper record. It could be a a medical image that you upload to them, and they'll give you advice. And there's a tricky situation here, which is that they can get things wrong, and so you be advised to have a doctor anyway and learn from this, but don't use it definitively to make decisions. And it's probably seems to be as good, possibly better in some ways than WebMD, static online information pages, and yet it can have unexpected errors, hallucinations, that sort of thing. And I've had on the show a guy, Dave DeBronkart, ePatient Dave, who has talked about how he's a cancer survivor and he checks everything both through ChatGPT and also through his doctor. And then, of course, the issue with large language models and healthcare is that large language models make things up and can't explain their results. But other than that, though, they're great in healthcare. And so, but that was one story I wanted to call attention to our audience. But Lana, any trade journal stories or news stories from the last week or two that you wanted to call attention to the audience?
Not last week or two, but in the fundraising worlds, there were a bunch of rounds, like $100+ million rounds in 2025. I'm sure you covered all of that, but yeah, the two that I think worth mentioning on this show is Function Health raising 300 million Series B at 2.5 billion. That's an insane valuation. And then we're raising 900 million Series E at 11 billion. So that just, I think, underpins what you were saying earlier about longevity, really taking up momentum in 2025.
Thanks. Yeah. And when I hear of OpenAI AI launching ChatGPT Health and Grok going after this market and others, it also highlights this problem that you have these frontier models built by hyperscalers, and we're in this phase with a lot of change. And they can the frontier model can just say, we do that. And so someone
Right.
can raise money and plan to ride on top of frontier models and raise $100 million and spend it, and then discover that ChatGPT is doing what they do. And so that's a concerning risk. We don't initially think of ChatGPT as a digital health company, but they can just simply expand into it and say, we do that too. And so that's a concern. There's been a lot of companies that have tried to not build the frontier model themselves, but be a digital health company riding on top of a frontier model. And the trouble is that your putative partner can say, oh, I like the size and growth of healthcare. I do that too. And then there's sort of no defense against that move if you're the startup.
Yeah,
So
yeah, absolutely. And, with the relaxed rules now coming out from FDA, I think ChatGPT is definitely going to expand into various healthcare use cases.
And have any of the models become the leader? And so a funny story about this is that Elon Musk, 5 years ago or 6 years ago, as a joke with his fellow engineers, decided to sell a flamethrower on the Tesla website. And they got what's called a plumber's torch, which is powered by propane. And true flamethrowers are powered by gasoline or napalm, not propane. And they called it a flamethrower. And then as engineers, they danced around the Tesla campus shooting it at each other. And, it has a 20-foot range. They're standing 40 feet away from each other, so they're not in danger. They decided to sell it, and they discovered it was illegal to sell a flamethrower across state lines. And so they printed on the side of it, not a flamethrower on the product, and then sold it across state lines. And the reason I tell that story is that I think for a while, maybe still today, Grok has a healthcare silo inside of Grok, and it's called Not a Doctor. And so you get to ask all the questions you want, but they're trying to protect themselves legally to have it both ways, both be a doctor and not be a doctor by calling their product Not a Doctor. And at least they did
Well,
that for a
now
few.
that's going to be even easier.
But have any of the large language models really distinguished themselves in healthcare? Everyone talks about how Claude is distinguishing itself for programmers, maybe also in legal as well. And Google is distinguishing itself as being embedded in the entire Google productivity suite and also on the consumer side as well, which they had a history of doing. But has anyone stood out? I'd say Open Evidence is not a hyperscaler and not a frontier model, but it's distinguishing itself in healthcare. But are any of the sort of hyperscalers distinguishing themselves in healthcare? I actually can't think of any of them truly distinguishing themselves in healthcare yet.
I think OpenAI is definitely doubling down on on healthcare AI use cases. I've heard from a few founders commenting on it across several use cases, especially including mental health. So, but I kind of want to be cautiously optimistic and stay on the sidelines and watch it.
It's really interesting. So I'm noticing that we have not seen a bunch of hyperscalers definitively say, I'm going to be the leader in healthcare, the way that Claude has done it in programming. But OpenAI in the last 2 months done some soul searching. Google produced better models and grew faster with consumers than OpenAI was expecting. That came at OpenAI's expense. And they called some emergency meetings and then they've just announced that they're launching Chat GPT Health. So that could be the result of those meetings. That they say we
Mhm.
have to be more like
Mhm.
Claude. We have to pick areas we're going to declare that we're the best in and make that come true. And so we're picking Chat GPT Health, whereas others have not gone that. Others of the hyperscalers have not. I can't think of Microsoft doing it or
Yeah.
Claude hasn't done it.
I mean,
Amazon hasn't done it.
Microsoft has a very strong health division, right? And they are in clinical workflows. So they've got everything to continue down that path. But my prediction, and could be totally wrong, but I think Open is going to take the lead.
Great, interesting. I'd love to see them do that. I'd love to see multiple hyperscalers delight us with more healthcare products. And when I hear of friends uploading stuff, health records to the frontier models, they're usually
Mhm.
talking about AI. I guess they're comfortable with it, or maybe they trust it, that sort of thing. Well, so any reports come out in the last week or in the last couple of weeks that you want to call the attention of our audience to, Lana?
Yeah, maybe just a couple of reports. So we subscribe to PitchBook as a firm, and there was report on healthcare AI agents, $155 billion opportunity. So I think this is very much linked to the discussion that we just had. And there was another very interesting report on MedTech VC paradox that is also worth taking a look at. Did you see anything on your end?
I didn't notice of the report generators I usually follow. None of them have come out with reports recently. I'm looking forward to Rock Health's report on the fourth quarter and year in review of digital health fundraising. And what is the MedTech VC paradox, by the way?
Gosh, well, it basically talks about how it's been taking a lot longer for medtech companies to return the investment. So there is if you invest in both medtech and biopharma, you expect a lot lower risk profile, but also lower return on the medtech side. You expect that it's going to exit a lot sooner, but and on the biopharma side, it's a higher risk profile, but it's calibrated with the higher risk and high return. Anyway, so this report has basically found that it's taking longer for medtech investments to return than what had been previously anticipated. There's a ton of other very, very interesting data there, and I highly recommend if you're into medtech to check that out.
Great, thank you. So next is a fun part, a crowd pleaser part of our show, which is what is a technology or a use of technology that's improved your life that's accessible to our audience? And so for this, I'm going to call out talking to AI on your phone. And so this is different than sitting in front of a PC with a web browser and typing in a question like a Google search. It's different than typing with your thumb on your phone. It's different than speaking into your chosen AI app on your phone and having it be transcribed. It's different than that. It's voice native. It's talking to your AI and having it respond quite quickly in real time with you. And interestingly, Sam Altman said this is going to be the highest and best use of OpenAI in the future. Like you call your lawyer to review a contract, your lawyer is not available, so you talk your contract issues out with your AI on your phone instead. And so I found this gets better and better. I like Google Gemini's version of this. Um, and so, but it's just it's a very different form factor than sitting in front of a PC with a big screen in front of you typing it in. And I think it's very useful, and I've gotten some astonishing, insightful answers. So my daughter is reading the Iliad right now, and so I asked Gemini, why do mothers name their sons Hector today but not Achilles? And I got an astonishingly insightful answer for that, and that's because Hector fought for his family. So, but how would Gemini know that's the answer? So, anyway, but do you have any thoughts on technology that's improved your life?
Yes, I'm actually a big fan of Withings body scan. It's a new smart scale that can do body composition. It can also give you heart health and vascular age. I'm not a big fan of wearables like watches on my wrist. I not also into rings on my fingers, so I know I'm probably an exception. But for somebody like me who still wants to have access to all of that helpful health data on a daily basis, Withings Body Scan is just a dream come true, and it's super easy to use. It has a great app. So highly recommend for those who do not like, rings or watches.
Very interesting. Thank you. Yeah. Well, good. So the next section is personal notices. This is a chance just to mention what you're doing that's coming up. And so I'll mention that my next show is Wednesday, January 28th with Dr. Ron Razmi of Zoe Capital. Topic is what's next? Strategic alternatives for the digital health CEO when realities have changed. And I'm also throwing a Boston party as well. This one will be on Thursday, January 22nd. We have hospital CIO John Campbell coming in to talk about hospital use cases for Gen AI in downtown Boston. That's a live event. And you can find all of these events at stephenwardell.eventbrite.com to register for. Lana, you're probably going to JP Morgan. Any sort of
Yep.
public
Yeah, I'm
appearance?
going to be at GPM. I'm I'm going to be at JPM next week, so say hello, me message on LinkedIn. I'm also going to be at LSI, Life Sciences Intelligence Conference, but it's a few months away. Yeah, that's it.
Great. So now we transition to the second half of our show, which is what next-gen MedTech brings to longevity. So building on advances in technology, MedTech's increasingly able to solve health problems and give us more chances for a long life, from spotting health emergencies early to replacing failing organs. And so we're going to talk about these topics. So why don't we just start with some definitions, Lana? What is longevity from a perspective of in general and also from a perspective of MedTech?
Yeah, longevity is not about living forever. At its core, longevity is about slowing the aging process, slowing that functional decline across systems from cardiometabolic to neurological to muscular, skeletal, so we can live longer, healthier, and more functional lives. So, in other words, longevity is about living more of your life in good health instead of managing chronic disease. And one of the interesting data points that I recently came across is that on average, we now spend about 37 years of our life managing chronic disease or in poor health. Isn't that shocking?
Yeah. And it's awful to think of that you might have lived your life differently and continue healthy indefinitely. But yeah, just amazing. Yeah. Well, so and can you tell us more about slowing aging? What does that actually mean? Is it possible?
Yeah. No, aging is think of it as progressive loss of biological function over time. Interestingly, aging is not one disease. It's a systems level failure across the body that manifests itself as many things. It could be heart disease, it could be diabetes or and neurological conditions, or even loss of muscle and balance. And so the big idea behind longevity is getting ahead of this systems level failure or deterioration through preventative care, early intervention, better management, so we can slow that aging process and chronic disease.
There's an interesting raging discussion about this in the world of biotech, not medtech. It's probably paralleled in medtech. It is that according to the FDA, aging is not a disease, and that actually reflects what Congress thinks and also what society thinks. And so you can't get a drug approved for aging. And so there's a workaround. People who might be interested in aging will get a drug for diabetes or for Alzheimer's or for cardiovascular disease, and then it may be simply addressing the symptoms, or it might be actually addressing the core aging problem. But there's a social movement to say actually aging is a disease, and you ought to be able to get endpoints for therapy for aging, and you ought to be able to get a drug approved for aging, even if you can't today. And also that we should be looking into these issues of core aging, because we spend so much on addressing Alzheimer's, diabetes, cardiovascular, other conditions, but they're strongly linked to aging. People get them as they grow older. And if only you could slow down aging, you might slow down all of those conditions in a single person. But we spend so little on aging research, and we don't have drugs approved for aging. And I'm sure that framework and that argument exists in medtech as strongly as it does in biotech as well. So can you expand on, so that there's the diseases of aging, and those are the big chronic conditions, the one I mentioned, like heart disease. There's also aging as a disease. Can you tell us more about aging as a disease and what those underlying mechanisms are that kind of start to fail as we grow older?
Yeah. So aging shows up as many things. So if we break it down on a cellular level, you've got declining mitochondrial efficiency. So essentially, your body doesn't produce as much energy based on the same amount of fuel. You have loss of tissue regeneration. So basically, our bodies do not repair and replace itself as quickly or as well as they used to. And there's a lot of increased inflammation across the body as we age. And that means that our body's alarm system is basically turned on more often than it should be. And that is not that great because it taxes our system and makes us more tired. There's also reduced neural plasticity. So in the brain, where our brain neurons or nerve cells are slower to form connections, as well as progressive accumulation of molecular and cellular damage. And all of that combined essentially is aging, and all of that is happening in parallel at the same time, causing those chronic conditions that you referred to earlier, from heart disease to diabetes, etc. So yeah, if we can have that new pathway, regulatory pathway, that allows us to get through new drugs like senolytics and epigenetic reprogramming and other things, I think we would be in a much better shape. And I think we are on that. I'm very hopefully optimistic. I think we're going to hopefully see new pathways. There are a number of trials that are about to hit the clinic. So we are on the way there. No predictions, but I think FDA is warming up to the idea of treating aging in that category.
And there's a very, very interesting, clever kind of, I'll call it a bank shot going on right now, which is, you probably have been following this, the company Loyal. And I think their CEO is an aging researcher, Celine Haliua, I think is her name. And so Loyal is looking to use drugs to extend the lifespan and health span
Dogs.
of dogs. And it's easier to get. And very often with veterinary medications, consumers are paying. There's not the same health insurance that there is for humans. And so there's a slightly lower standard for getting a drug to dogs, because we're not as concerned we're very concerned about the health of humans and having products be safe and effective. We're a little less concerned when it comes to animals. And that allows drugs to get out there. And then we're not so worried about reimbursement when it comes to dogs because we're hoping that dog owners who love their dogs very much will pay out of pocket. So very different market. But the crazy thing is, if you could show 20% life extension and health span extension in dogs, then you get to come back to the FDA and say, what are you doing? Why are you not approving this in people? If it works in mammals and dogs, then why wouldn't you approve it in people? So it's a very interesting kind of bank shot to address this societal issue that the FDA and Congress and society in general thinks that aging is an inevitability, that's not a disease. And yet aging can be engineered, it can be slowed down, it can be nearly stopped, it can in certain cases be reversed. And so therefore it's not an inevitability and it can be engineered, and therefore with greater knowledge and power comes greater responsibility. We ought to be seeking to address longevity. Can you tell us a little more about the difference between lifespan, health span, and fertility span?
Yeah, absolutely. Lifespan is how long we live. Health span is how long we live well. And fertility span is how long we live well with fully functioning reproductive and hormonal health. And Steve, I recently heard that there's a new span. It's called brain span. It's
Oh,
how long we live with fully functioning brain.
very interesting. Yeah. And
I'm sure somebody is coming up with a new span.
And with lifespan and health span, those are very important. I'll just mention that um, we don't give a lot of consideration to the distinction between lifespan and health span, and a lot of people have pointed out that huge amounts of money seem to go to extending the lives of the oldest people who are not gaining health from this.
Mhm,
Giant amounts of resources
mhm.
spent people in their last 2 weeks of life, or where they are given a small amount of lifespan but not health span. And as a society, we might want to reprioritize that and try to give greater health span to everybody. So it's an interesting, important.
Yeah. And it's a tough one. It's a tough dilemma for sure, because when investments decisions get made, there are many considerations that go um, into that investment. But the data point that I mentioned earlier in the conversation, where we now spend on average 37 years of our life managing chronic disease, that directly goes to that comment about health span. So if we can even reduce that by 10 years, that improves our health span, right? That improves how many years we'll live without the disease, without chronic disease, and managing it. So from the investment standpoint, kind of makes sense to invest into extending the health span rather than the lifespan.
So Jens is on the call, and he mentions on the topic of aging as a disease, we should move away from the disease focus altogether and target maintenance or improvement of function. And this will move us eventually away from sick care to real health care. This move is happening. Think about clinical trials on frailty or on pre-symptomatic neurodegenerative disease. What we need are good functional biomarkers and readouts. So I think that's very insightful, and
Can I
there's
agree with you, Jens?
a lot of good work being done on finding functional biomarkers, tracking aging and maintenance of function as well. So any other thoughts on what Jen's had to say?
No, first of all, hello. Great to see you on the following us. No, I just 100% agree with what he's saying, and we need to see more of that for sure.
And Thomas on the call, this is Thomas, I'm going to get the name wrong, but Thomas Sayo of Catalyst Institute. He says about aging as a disease, our not-for-profit Catalyst Institute has proposed the Thrive Act, establishing a regulatory pathway, tiered evidentiary standards, incentives for health span drugs, devices, and supplements. So thank you, Thomas. I wanted to call out your name and organization here so people can look into that. Someone has proposed legislation that would address this. That's one that's one of the first times I've seen something that's specific. So thank you. Um, and Thomas also points out that Alex Javoronkov of In Silico Medicine has coined peak span. So have you heard of peak span? I guess I can imagine what that is.
Nuts. And what is PickSpan?
Well, maybe Thomas, you can
We can
tell us
look
what
it up.
it sounds like. That, so I'll imagine an answer to that, but people tend to hit their mental and physical prime maybe in their And then wouldn't it be, and so call that your peak. And then wouldn't it be wonderful if you could just stay that way and not have graying hair and not have, you know, senior moments and memory
Mhm.
problems and that sort of thing. So
Gotcha.
that's great. And then, so is longevity med tech investable? And can you tell us about the category as an investment theme?
Um, Apologize. Yeah, no, I think it's definitely investable, but I also think that you have to be very, very selective. If we talk about longevity in general, right, as a category, it's very broad. It's not one thing. It's so you have to be. It's not one asset class. So you have to be very selective, and so it really depends on how you break it down. Some sectors, I would say, are very investable, and some are less so. I think the biggest mistake many make is probably just look at longevity as one bucket. But when it comes to medtech in particular, I don't know if it's a separate category per se, but so we're talking about sensors, actuators, devices that essentially monitor health, detect problems, and then intervene. And that is very investable, right? There are many early stage innovations in this space. Think of NeuroPace. It's basically implantable device for epilepsy patients that can monitor for seizures, detect seizures, and then deliver neurostimulation to prevent seizures. So that's one of the examples, but there are so many other devices that are in the same kind of wheelhouse. AliveCore is one of the other medical devices on the market that monitors your cardiac rhythm, for example.
And I think you've broken down the longevity investment theme into four segments or so. Can you go into what those four segments are for our audience?
Well, yeah. So, as an investment theme, the way I think about longevity is as a technology stack, because you have to really go after the systems level failure. I strongly believe that it's a technology stack of medtech, biopharma, data, and AI. Working together to slow functional decline. So think of continuous sensors working with devices and a real-time AI intelligence to deliver personalized advanced therapeutics, for example. So NeuroPace is a great example. Beta Bionics is another really great example that we can talk more about later. Artificial pancreas.
That's great. Thanks. And so, I it was interesting because in my head, I developed a three category definition of longevity investing. Yours is almost the same, but I actually left out longevity med tech, and you've included longevity med tech. So my definition of the opportunity, there's longevity biotech, which is long bio, which is the drugs themselves, and that's actually just biotech. It's just biotech, except it's on the diseases of aging or aging as a disease. And then there's what I call longevity care, and the word care implies that there's a clinician and a patient in there. And so that's often consumer based, but could be reimbursed, but it's often consumer pay. And there's a physician involved, a longevity physician, a geriatrician, maybe it's a nurse, maybe it's some other clinician, could even be, an allied medical professional or something involved there. And they're giving you something you can't just buy as a consumer. So if you want peptides, if you want IVs, you have to get care. And then there's longevity tech, and that's usually straight consumer oriented. So you don't need a clinician involved there. And that would be like, I think that would be like Aura Ring or something like that.
Mhm.
And then you've added this four, and so that roughly maps to your four categories, but you add medtech in there as well, which I
MedTech.
hadn't
Yeah, there are
considered.
four different categories. Yeah, that line up nicely.
Can you tell us more about these categories, longevity medtech?
Yeah, no. So I think covered longevity medtech, right? But maybe what would be helpful to talk about is what's fueling longevity medtech, or some of the breakthroughs and innovations that make longevity medtech possible. And there, I see four different buckets, and So we can talk about them if like sensors and actuators, I think, and bionics, organ replacement. So from the sensors and actuators perspective, think, sensors are absolutely foundational for longevity because what we can't manage what we can measure. And continuous sensing allows us to track cardiac rhythm, glucose, blood oxygenation, sleep, movement, you name it. So what we used to only able to measure and track in the hospital setting, we now have access to in the comfort of our home, and that's incredible. And then you couple that with actuators, devices that can intervene and enable timely intervention and close the loop. And I think you have perfect foundation for all longevity strategies. So again, sensors working together with actuators is absolutely basic and foundational here for longevity. One example that I always like to mention is about this company Beta Bionics that went public last year, and it's basically an artificial pancreas solution for diabetic patients. They have developed an automated insulin delivery that works together with Dexcom, CGM, continuous glucose monitor. It senses when you're out of range and then automatically delivers insulin without a user or a patient having to intervene. I think that's a great example of an innovation and a solution that really taps both sensors and actuator in real life. And there is just so many other examples just like that. And we're probably going to see more and more of medical devices working together with biopharma to go after longevity as a sector.
And Jen's adds, the interesting thing about these categories, I think is referring to the four ways you broke down the investment opportunity,
Yeah.
is that there's overlap between all of them. This is a field where we actually finally will experience convergence. So yeah, Jens, I agree. And I would say an interesting thing we're seeing right now is that the companies that don't have doctors as part of the care loop are trying to figure out the maximum they can offer that doctors used to offer. Superpower is trying to give a $10,000 a year concierge longevity experience for $200 a year, for example. And they, instead of everybody having their own doctor, there may be no doctor involved, or maybe you get a brief call with a doctor, as part of the package. But there's a number of companies pursuing that. So you could say that there's either a doctor in the loop or on the loop or something like that. Or maybe there's no doctor. Maybe it's like Aura, there's no doctor, and Fitbit, there's no doctor. But so the automated ones are coming after the low skill humans, and the automation plus low skill is going after the high skill humans like doctors together. That's an example of convergence. But yeah, thank you. And then so I also wanted to mention, Lana, you talked about sensors. So there's multiple revolutions going on right now with sensors that I'm very excited about. But in general, you have sensors that used to be only in a clinic setting, which is expensive, and now they're in the home setting or in the purely consumer setting. You have sensors that used to be consumer grade and cheap, and now they remain cheap. Now they become clinical grade while remaining cheap. You have sensors that used to be snapshot sensors, and now they become continuous sensors. You have different data, more data in sensors, and ultimately the cost of the hardware of the sensor seems to be going over time to zero. And so you can imagine having sensors for everything, measuring everything. So, and then my favorite story about sensors and actuators working together is there's a company out there called Nightwear, which is for serious clinical nightmares. And so it uses the Apple Watch on your wrist at night. People only have nightmares in deep sleep. And so it uses, and if they have nightmares, they rapidly fall into deep sleep, have a terrible nightmare, wake up, and then fall into deep sleep, have a terrible nightmare, wake up, and they never get good sleep. And so the Apple Watch can detect if you're in light sleep, not having a nightmare. And then if you go into deep sleep and you are likely to have a nightmare, it will buzz on your wrist enough to move you to light sleep, but not enough to wake you. And so the sensor is detecting your body movement to guess where you are in your sleep cycle. And the actuator is buzzing your wrist with haptic actuators to keep you out of deep sleep. And so that's
Yeah.
a really interesting example.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think cheap sensing, continuous sensing is a huge breakthrough and innovation that's driving or fueling the longevity movement, I think. And that just made me think of bionics technology because all of this, right, actuators and sensors are built in. And what I think made bionic technology possible, I don't know if you've seen some of the latest that's coming out from what's the name of the company out of the UK. It'll come back to me, but the bionic hands that they have recently launched are just out of this world. You know, they essentially function just like human hands. They look like human hands. You know, all the dexterity and everything is amazing. And I think Azure is another company, also European, coming out of Iceland, has amazing bionic technology for both limbs, for legs, hands, you name it. And bionic technology leverages sensors, actuators, robotics, AI, software. So, you know, being able to combine all of this is what's, I think, enabling us and that's core to health span, right? Because over time we will lose movement, and you know if we have something like this that essentially replaces or augments motion in the same way, right? Where we see very little change, right, between our own motion, in motion, or if we have a bionic hand, maybe some people will prefer to have bionic hand or a leg. But all of these advancements in medtech are now essentially enabling us to start thinking about how do we extend that health span that we were talking earlier about. And it's only one of the few pieces. There's so much other innovation that's happening in medtech that could make longevity easier from making it a reality.
That's interesting. So, a good working definition of bionics is that they are these electronics we've been talking about, could be sensors, could be actuators, etc. But they restore function or augment failing systems. That's what makes them bionics. And
And they
the example,
mimic human movements rather than just being, you know, statically mechanical, moving back and forth or side to side. They're adjust just like a human body would adjust to a rough surface, right? Or an unusual setting or situation. So bionics technology senses what's coming your way and it adjusts real time.
and the example of cochlear implants. I would not have thought of that of bionics, but I think all of us have seen someone, wearing a cochlear implant, and that it clearly is. And so we're all beginning to see these in society. And the joke I've heard about bionics is that we're all bionic and we're all cyborgs because none of us can remember phone numbers anymore, and we all carry around our bionic implement in our pocket, and within arm's reach
There
and
you go.
all the time. Um,
That's it.
very
That's memory prosthetics, right? I never thought of my phone as memory prosthetics, but here we are.
and another interesting topic for medtech is organ replacement. Can you tell us about what's going on in organ replacement?
Yeah, I know that's definitely a very interesting topic, and it's really, I think it's getting better fast. So think of mechanical hearts or artificial kidneys or pancreas. I think I've mentioned beta bionics now several times, so I'm not going to go there. Also, when we talk about organ replacement, I like to think of not necessarily replacing an organ, but maybe augmenting or creating a system that mimics the function of that organ. Beta bionics is a good example. But Another good example is what Picard Medical has been working on, the mechanical heart. So I think their total heart solution is, I forget what it's called, cardia, I think. But essentially can run your ventricles for you as you are waiting for a heart transplant. So it's something that's done during surgery, and your ventricles are basically disabled, right? And you have now a device running those ventricles for you. There are many other examples of valve replacements, for example, and many other parts that can be replaced within a human body that I'm not going to go into. But we are definitely on the way to potentially having a full mechanical heart, if or full pancreas, right? Like beta bionics. We've got all the building blocks in MedTech to make it happen as we are continuing to innovate.
So, one of the sort of medical models of mortality for the last few hundred years has been that people sort of continue to live until they have one critical organ failure and then they die.
Mhm.
That was a model for how people live. And then over the last, call it 70 years, we've been slowly getting better and better at saving organs or augmenting organs, replacing organs, and so now you can have a critical organ fail and you have multiple options which are getting better
Mhm.
and better. And then you don't have to die when your first critical organ fails. And the hardest is probably the heart and the brain to get here. And so this keeps getting better and better. And I love to hear about these new advances. And then there's also the work of Michael Levin, a Tufts professor who's found the most astonishing things, which is that everyone knows that if you take a salamander, this is going to sound a little gross, but if you take a salamander and cut its arm off, it will grow back an arm. Um, and but that's an incredible regenerative capacity. We don't know how exactly it knows how to do that. It'll grow back a correctly sized arm, correct dimensions, correct amount. If you cut the arm off of a frog, it won't grow back. But Michael Levin in his lab, he can change the chemicals and the electricity at the stump and cause the frog arm to grow back, which makes everyone gasp because it suggests, hey, you can do that in frogs. Could you do it in people? And could you do it if someone has a liver failure? Could you grow their own liver? If someone has lost an arm in an accident, a human, could you regrow their arm like the frog regrows its arm? And the early research is promising, um, but that's a very intriguing area of research right now. Is could we trigger this regenerative capacity? Could someone regrow an organ that's getting worn out or that failed? But between now and when that happens, we need these other options, which are med tech options for organ replacement.
It's not my area of expertise, Steve. It's very intriguing, but what I know for sure is that the leap from frogs to humans is a huge leap. So I think we are yet to see whether something like this is possible in humans.
And we tend to think that that what makes us us is our brain, and that
Mhm.
you can replace your liver and it's you, and you don't
Mhm.
become the human or pig that you got the liver from. You remain you. But that if you replace your brain, you wouldn't be you anymore. You might even be the person you got the brain from at that point or whatever. But do you have any thoughts on brain
Yeah.
replacement, artificial brains?
So I think it's less about replacing brains and more about cognitive and neural support. You might have heard about brain computer interfaces. There are a number of companies in that space, and there are ways to bring those solutions to market, like Paradromics and Synchron and Neuralink, all working to bring these kind of solutions to life. And I've seen them recently. Went to the BCI symposium, and I spoke with some of the patients with paralysis and spinal cord injury, and also Alzheimer's disease. And for some of these patients, these kind of solutions would be absolutely life-changing because some of these patients are not able to move or just tend to daily life, and they're very lonely not being able to communicate with their family and friends. And so these kind of BCI solutions could make it they could help them communicate, they could help them even pick up a glass of water, um, and that would make a huge difference. So for me, it's not about replacing our brains, it's about augmenting or supporting the neural supporting feeling neural circuits and giving that, again, cognitive and neural support that some of us might need, and many of us will need as we live longer.
And so we're nearing the bottom of the hour. So why don't we end on the note of AI, generative AI, large language model AI, modern breakthroughs in AI? Where does this fit into medtech and into longevity medtech?
Yeah, good question. AI basically is very good at separating noise from what matters. And many of us are busy running around and we have all of these wearables collecting data. And it's so confusing sometimes what to focus on. So, what AI helps us do is really hone in on what matters and helps produce an insight on how we can change our lifestyle or exercise. It helps predict a decline. So, let's just take neuropace, right? It can, for epilepsy patients, it can predict when that next seizure is going to occur. So AI is very good at looking for patterns, analyzing large amounts of data, and focuses you on like the next action or that is going to lead to a better outcome. That's what AI can do, and that's what it's meant to do.
Great, very interesting. Yeah. So I hopefully we'll see you. There's algorithms that would power digital medtech devices in longevity, and those don't need to be AI. And then there's large language model AI, which can so help interpret diagnostic data that's unclear, and that does require. So very interesting. Well, thank you. Well, so we're at the bottom of the hour. Lana, any final thoughts on investing in longevity medtech or on what you're seeing in the marketplace?
Well, maybe one thing, and that is longevity is not about living forever. It's about living more of your life in good health. And MedTech gives us all the tools that we need right now to actually make that future a reality. So, no excuses.
Fantastic. Really interesting. And I think you're one of the only people talking about the medtech angle on this. So thanks for bringing that to our audience.
Thanks, Steve.
Wonderful. Well, so you've been listening to the Digital Health Investor Talk show. So we'll be publishing this show as part of our show on Apple and Spotify. Would love to have you listen, review, comment. Our next show is January 28th on the topic of what's next, strategic alternatives for the digital health CEO when realities have changed. And we have a party coming up, an evening reception on Thursday, January 22nd in Boston with a hospital CIO talking about hospital use cases for Gen AI. Thanks so much. Looking forward to seeing you there.